Hey everyone, Jarek here, and welcome.
Welcome to City 17.
I don't know, that always pops into my head. This game is Perish. It is a quote-unquote hardcore co-op roguelike first-person shooter in a setting based off a mix of Roman and Greek mythology where your goal is to fight out of purgatory. If the roguelike thing scared you away, don't worry. This is focused more on first-person shooter gameplay, giving you fun tools to play with instead of RPG leveling up. This video is not sponsored, but the game comes out tomorrow, so they threw me a key early to try the game out. They also gave me my own unique skin, and you can also get the skin yourself for free. Once in game, open your options, go to the gameplay tab, and type in the password Jarek to get this nifty black and red skin, because black and red is what we do around here. This is exclusive to this channel, so huge thanks to the devs for giving me my own skin. Alright, let's start with the PC release. There is quite a few options. Pretty much everything I would want to have is here, including NVIDIA options like DLSS, RTX, and NVIDIA Reflex. With that said, my performance was kind of everywhere. I would get anywhere between 40 FPS to 200 FPS. Most of the time it stayed above 60, but it was noticeable. Occasionally my frame rate would just implode to the point of being unplayable for a little bit. This very rarely happened, but that would be a terrible way for a run to end. It didn't really matter what settings I had selected, so it wasn't NVIDIA RTX stuff messing with my frame rate. There's definitely a little bit of optimization to work on. With that said, it's far from unplayable. Vast majority of the time it stays over 60 FPS. I just wish the frame rate was stable. Going back into the options, if you click under the gameplay tab, there are a lot of really neat settings in here, one of which allows you to entirely customize your difficulty. There will be presets for easy, normal, and hard, however, you can adjust so much here. You can turn on and off mouse aim assist, you can turn on and off controller aim assist, you can make enemy hitboxes bigger, you can make enemies stagger more often and stagger for longer, you can make enemy windup time shorter or longer before they attack, and you can adjust enemy speed. If you don't want to mess with any of this, the difficulty settings have their own presets, so you don't need to bother, but this is a bunch of really cool stuff to play around with. Now, since Perish based itself off Roman and Greek mythology, there is a lot to play with. This means graphically things can be incredibly interesting. I oftentimes found myself staring off into the skybox just looking at the environment I was in. And enemy designs are equally as interesting as you would expect. There's even a codex in-game to tell you more about the enemies. With that said, the graphics kind of fall apart a little bit when things start moving. Animations are rather stiff, and there's not really any world interaction. You may be able to break a vase here or there, but nothing more than that. The animations aren't so bad that they entirely ruin the game. It doesn't look like Unity Engine's first project or anything, but they definitely stand out since the rest of the world looks so much better. So the graphics are a bit hit or miss, but ultimately for a $20 game they get a pass. Gameplay is where this game starts getting really interesting and quite ambitious. They aimed for the gameplay to be somewhat punishing, but not in a way that feels overly bearing. Your health is based off those links in the bottom left. The bar to the right of it is your boost. It is not a shield or anything. If you get hit once, you lose one of these links. You start the game with only 2 and get more later. This can be very punishing early on. I'll come back to this. The overall gameplay is roguelike in structure, where you travel between visually distinct worlds doing random objectives to progress. After you complete an objective, you choose between 3 cards of varying rarities. These range from banking your current money so you don't lose it if you die, to explosive throwing daggers, to regaining health after every 25 enemies killed. Obviously, the cards that are better are rarer. At the end of each level, you have the option to continue your run or return to base so you can save your money and access the shop. If you die in this game, you lose a large sum of your money. This shop is tied closely to your gameplay options. You get a primary weapon. This may be a gun or a melee weapon. This game does have full-on melee combat, including blocking and all of that. All of the weapons have 2 challenges for you to unlock passive abilities and homing abilities. You can see all this info by holding tab. This will also tell you your teammates' health and all of that. Let's take this bolt action that has the new skin, for example. Its passive ability requires you to kill 30 enemies while aiming down sights, which will unlock a scope. Pretty negligible, to be honest. Most other upgrades do more than this. But its homing ability requires you to get 20 collaterals. You don't have to kill, you just have to get 20 collaterals. This will allow you to charge up your entire magazine to fire all those shots at once, and then it'll ricochet between enemies. So it is worth doing these challenges. All players get throwable daggers on recharge. You get a consumable item, things like a bubble shield or a vitality shard, allowing you to regain a link of your health if you kill a certain number of enemies in a certain time frame. You get a crown, for example the Arc Crown, that will passively shock enemies nearby. You can get up to 6 rings that'll passively buff you with things like more health, faster dash regen, hold more consumables, make melee attacks stronger, etc, etc. Things are unlocked in the shop mostly by currency, but occasionally you get things by killing bosses. Also, at any given time, you get the Dark Messiah kick. You can even do this while reloading. This is very blatantly inspired by Dark Messiah, and if you don't believe me, one of the cards you get is even called Dark Messiah. This is honestly some of the most fun I had in the entire game. It's just really funny to kick something and have them instantly die via ragdoll. If the enemies aren't near anything that doesn't kill them instantly, then it does nowhere near as much damage, but just by the fact that they're standing next to those spikes, suddenly your boot becomes 20 million times stronger. I'm not complaining, I actually wish more games had stupid, silly stuff like this. There are over 14 different areas to explore, each with their own set of enemies that you encounter. They really are quite varied, and there are 7 bosses in total to beat. I did mention this is co-op, and I would highly encourage you to play in co-op. Difficulty scales with the number of players, so objectives will have additional tasks, more enemies will spawn, bosses will get stronger, so on and so forth. So this is quite a promising base for a roguelike style first-person shooter, especially one that puts a little more emphasis on melee combat. With that said, my experience playing this game was either having a good amount of fun or being really annoyed. I have some complaints that majorly affect your fun, and I think they can be addressed in pretty easy ways. The first one is that movement is really slow. For combat, I actually don't mind this too much. They're clearly going for a more weighted melee style combat. Even with the guns, it still feels a little slower and almost janky in a way, but not necessarily in a negative way. The problem is that just walking from point A to point B takes too long. If they don't want to adjust the entire pacing of the combat, then give us an infinite toggle sprint. There's already a dash in this game, and there are some upgrades relating to the dash, so I don't think this would affect the gameplay too much, as you're more likely to dash in combat. And yes, I know there are some cards that speed up your movement a little bit, but not in a tremendously meaningful way. It still feels too slow. The next complaint I have is that early game is extremely punishing. And not in a way that feels like a difficult challenge, but in a way that just kind of feels annoying, grindy, and cheap. Like I said, you only get 2 links, and you lose one of those links when you get hit by anything. Your character is also not built up at this point because this is a roguelike, so you are significantly weaker. It really does feel like the game is balanced more for mid-game rather than early game, and the opposite is true for late game. The game starts getting too easy. There was one more thing in the shop I didn't mention, and these are the Orphic Rites. These give you challenges to unlock certain things in the shop, and these are a little too specific. This is also true with some of the weapon upgrades. For example, for this cannon, which is actually a flamethrower, you are required to kill 10 enemies. 10 enemies that are rare spawns only in one of the worlds. I saw 2 of them total with one of my runs. Some of these upgrades really need to be changed to not feel like you're grinding, which is another complaint. This game can feel rather grindy at times. Needing to stop at the end of the level to decide whether to go back to your shop or continue on to the next level is really what adds to the grind. When you go back to that shop in the main base, that's not a checkpoint anymore. You're restarting your whole run. You're just saving the money you have so you don't lose it. I really think there needs to be a shop at some point through your run. Maybe not at the end of every level, but something, just so this doesn't feel so grindy. The next complaint I have is that you have no secondary weapon. You have a primary, then an odd assortment of other things you can do. This isn't awful, it's not like you have no options, but it does feel a bit limiting, especially if you're running with a weapon that has little range like the shotgun. Needing to rely on those daggers for long-range shots is a little annoying, and if you have to reload, then, well, kicking is pretty much your only option. And my last complaint is a really big one. You cannot revive your teammates. I know your goal is to make this game punishing, but that doesn't feel punishing, that just feels cheap. Now, I'm not saying revive indefinitely, because then that would make the game far too easy. What I will suggest, though, is allow you to revive your teammates once per level. This is what Rainbow Six Vegas did for Terra Stunt. I think that's a good option. Well, not reviving your teammates in Terra Stunt, but you could respawn once in Terra Stunt. You get what I mean. If you played on realistic difficulty, you only had 1 respawn. If you played on easier difficulties, you had more respawns. You have difficulty options in this game. This could just be something you add into those options. It feels really bad and annoying when you die and you just have to watch your teammate play through the rest of the level. You could be sitting there for 10-15 minutes at a time. This, to me, above everything else, can really kill a game. This is doubly bad because you can take damage without even realizing it, especially since once you take damage, you're not invincible, so you can randomly lose 3 links at a time. All it takes is that one mistake, and then suddenly you lose your health, and now you're watching your teammate for the rest of the game. And on top of that, while you're watching your teammate, he's still gaining money, and you're not gaining anything because you died, and you lost a bunch of money. Yeah, it's rough, and I would really suggest changing this. So, is Perish worth it? Well, Maybe. It is only $20, which is not that expensive for this much content. My experience while playing this game was all over the place. At times it was quite fun, at times I was quite annoyed. I think ultimately whether this game will be worth it for you is that if you like the sort of slower, janky combat feel, if you loved the sort of melee that Dark Messiah had, and imagine that with guns, because this game really does feel like they just tried to turn Dark Messiah into a roguelike boomer shooter, then you'll probably enjoy this game. So I can't really recommend for or against it. It's a pretty solid maybe, and that should be everything I have to say about Perish. I'd like to remind everyone I do have YouTube memberships. You will get early access to my videos and weekly shoutouts. I keep it very cheap. I want it to be the same as my Twitch. Speaking of, I also have a Twitch. If you want to hang out and follow over there, it's at the bottom right. You can also see my Twitter on the screen at the bottom left. Thank all you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.